I was out looking at the sky, the stars and the moon. That's what Bryan Kohberger told police when they asked him where he was the night 4 University of Idaho students were brutally stabbed to death in their beds. Not home sleeping. Not studying for his PhD in criminology. He was out driving alone in the middle of the night looking at the stars. It was an answer so bizarre, so detached, so devoid of any real alibi, that it immediately raised red flags for investigators who had been hunting a killer for 47 agonizing days. But Bryan Kohberger wasn't just any suspect. He was a 28-year-old PhD student studying criminal justice at Washington State University, just 15 minutes across the state line from Moscow, Idaho, where the murders occurred. He had spent years studying how criminals think, how they operate, how they evade capture. He had written academic papers about the psychology of killers. He had asked convicted criminals in online surveys how they chose their victims, how they felt during the attack, whether they experienced remorse, and now he was accused of becoming the very thing he studied. On November 13, 2022, 4 young lives were stolen in one of the most brutal and shocking crimes in recent American history. Kaylee Goncalves, 21, Madison Mogen, 21, Zana Kernodle, 20, Ethan Chapin, 20. All stabbed multiple times while they slept in an off-campus home in the quiet college town of Moscow, Idaho. The killer entered like a shadow, moved through the house with terrifying precision, and left behind a scene so horrific that seasoned investigators would later say they had never seen anything like it. But the killer made one critical mistake. He was seen by a surviving roommate who opened her bedroom door at 4:17 a.m. and came face to face with a man dressed in black, wearing a mask with bushy eyebrows and piercing eyes. A man who walked right past her and out the back door, leaving behind 4 bodies and 1 traumatized witness who would become the key to solving the case. This is the story of the Idaho student murders. This is the story of Bryan Kohberger, the criminology student accused of hunting his victims like they were subjects in one of his research projects. And this is the story of Dylan Mortensen, the only witness, the young woman whose glimpse of the killer in those terrifying seconds would help bring him to justice. This is The Only Witness. Moscow, Idaho, is a small university town nestled in the rolling hills of the Idaho Panhandle, home to about 25,000 people, roughly half of whom are students at the University of Idaho. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where violent crime is virtually non-existent, where parents send their children to college confident they'll be safe. It's a community built on trust, tradition, and the simple rhythms of college life. People don't lock their doors in Moscow. They don't look over their shoulders walking home at night. They don't expect monsters to live among them. Till November 13, 2022, when 4 students were murdered in their sleep, and everything changed forever. The house at 1122 King Road was a typical college rental, a white wood-sided home with 6 bedrooms spread across 3 floors. It sat just off campus, in a neighborhood filled with similar student housing, where parties were common, where people came and went at all hours, where noise and activity were just part of college life. Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen shared a bedroom on the 3rd floor. Zana Kernodle had a bedroom on the 2nd floor. And 2 other roommates, Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk, occupied bedrooms on the 1st floor. On the night of November 12, 2022, a Saturday, the residents of 1122 King Road were living their normal college lives, completely unaware that a predator was watching them. Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen, best friends since 6th grade, inseparable since childhood, went out that night to the Corner Club, a popular bar in downtown Moscow. They spent hours dancing, laughing, taking photos, living the carefree existence of 21-year-olds in their final year of college. Around 1:40 a.m., surveillance cameras captured them at the Grub Truck, a local food truck that serves late-night pasta to hungry students. The footage shows them smiling, chatting with other students, completely at ease. They ordered their food, waited a few minutes, then caught an Uber home, arriving at 1122 King Road at 1:56 a.m. Zana Kernodle and her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, had spent their evening at a fraternity party. Ethan was a member of Sigma Chi and a freshman at the University of Idaho, a bright young man studying recreation, sport, and tourism management. He didn't live at the King Road house. He had a dorm room on campus, but he frequently stayed with Zana, his girlfriend of just over a year. They arrived home around 1:45 a.m., heading up to Zana's second-floor bedroom. By 2 a.m., everyone was home. The house was settling into the quiet of late night. Kaylee and Madison were on the third floor. Zana and Ethan were on the second floor. Dylan and Bethany were on the first floor. 6 people, 5 of them students at the University of Idaho, one of them a visitor spending the night with his girlfriend. A typical Saturday night in a college town. None of them knew that someone was watching the house. Someone who had been watching for weeks, maybe months. Someone who knew the layout, who knew the routines, who had been planning. If you're following this story and want to hear more cases where survival led to justice, don't forget to subscribe to The Only Witness. We tell the stories that demand remembrance and accountability. At approximately 4 a.m., a white Hyundai Elantra was captured on surveillance cameras in the neighborhood surrounding 1122 King Road. The vehicle drove past the house slowly, turned around, drove past again, circling the area multiple times. This wasn't the first time the car had been in the neighborhood. In the weeks leading up to the murders, investigators would later discover that the same vehicle had been spotted near the house at least 12 times, always late at night, always driving slowly, always watching. At 4:17 a.m., someone entered 1122 King Road through a sliding glass door on the second floor. The door had been left unlocked, a common practice in a town where students felt safe, where break-ins were rare, where no one imagined a killer would walk through their door in the middle of the night. The intruder moved through the house with purpose and precision. He wore dark clothing, gloves, and a mask covering most of his face. And he carried a large fixed-blade knife, a KA-bar-style military combat knife with a 7-inch blade designed for one thing: killing efficiently. He went to the third floor first. Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogan were asleep in the same bed, a habit they had maintained since childhood sleepovers. The killer attacked them both with shocking brutality, stabbing them multiple times while they slept. The medical examiner would later determine that some of the wounds were defensive, meaning at least one of them had woken up and tried to fight back. But the attack was fast, vicious, and overwhelming. Both young women died in that bed together, just as they had lived their lives. The killer then moved to the second floor. Zana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin were in Zana's bedroom. Investigators believe Zana may have been awake, possibly on her phone when she heard something. Her door had a code lock and there were signs of a struggle, suggesting she tried to defend herself and Ethan. But the killer overpowered them both. Ethan was stabbed multiple times. Zana fought back, suffering defensive wounds on her hands and arms, but ultimately succumbing to her injuries. Her final act was using her dying moments to open her phone and send a text, though the contents of that message have never been made public. The attack was over in minutes. 4 people were dead. The house was silent except for the faint sounds of labored breathing, of life slipping away. And then, the killer made a mistake. As he was leaving, walking down the hallway toward the back door, Dylan Mortensen opened her bedroom door. Dylan, a 21-year-old junior at the University of Idaho, had been woken by sounds in the house. She later told police she heard what she thought was Kaylee playing with her dog Murphy on the third floor. She heard voices, muffled and indistinct. She heard crying. She heard a male voice say something like, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." She thought maybe one of her roommates had brought someone home, that maybe there was some kind of argument or drama happening. She opened her door, and standing in the hallway, just feet away from her, was a man dressed in black. He was wearing a mask. He was taller than her, athletic build, and his eyes, visible through the mask, were cold and emotionless. But what Dylan would remember most, what would haunt her for months, were his eyebrows. Thick, bushy, distinctive eyebrows that stood out even in the dim light of the hallway. The man walked toward her. Dylan froze, terrified, her mind unable to process what she was seeing, unable to understand the danger she was in. The man walked right past her, continuing toward the back door. He didn't speak. He didn't acknowledge her. He simply walked by, as if she wasn't even there. Dylan closed her door and locked it. She stood there, shaking, confused, her heart pounding. She didn't call 911, she didn't scream, she didn't wake up Bethany. She later told investigators she was in shock, that she thought maybe what she had seen wasn't real, that maybe she had imagined it. She stayed in her locked room until late morning, paralyzed by fear and confusion. It wasn't until 11:58 a.m., nearly 8 hours after the murders, that police received a 911 call from the King Road house. One of the surviving roommates, investigators never specified which one, had called friends over because they couldn't wake up one of the residents. When those friends arrived and saw the scene, they called 911, reporting an unconscious person. When officers arrived, they discovered a massacre. 4 young people brutally stabbed to death in their beds. Blood everywhere. A crime scene so horrific that even veteran investigators would later describe it as one of the worst they had ever encountered. Before we continue, hit subscribe to The Only Witness, because some truths are too dark to stay buried. We tell the stories that remind us why justice matters. The Moscow Police Department immediately launched a massive investigation. The FBI, Idaho State Police, and multiple other agencies joined the effort. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, interviewed hundreds of people, analyzed thousands of hours of surveillance footage, and followed up on thousands of tips from the public. But for weeks there were no arrests, no named suspects, and a community living in absolute terror. Students fled the University of Idaho campus. Parents pulled their children out of school. Those who remained armed themselves, installed security systems, and refused to go anywhere alone. The town of Moscow, once a place of safety and trust, became a place of suspicion and fear. Everyone was a suspect. Every stranger was a potential killer. The case became a national obsession. Cable news covered it relentlessly. True crime social media communities dissected every detail. Amateur sleuths on TikTok and Reddit developed theories, pointed fingers at innocent people, and spread misinformation. The pressure on law enforcement was immense. Then, in mid-November, investigators released a key piece of information. They were looking for a white Hyundai Elantra that had been seen in the area around the time of the murders. It was a crucial detail, but it would take weeks to track down the right vehicle. On December 30th, 2022, 47 days after the murders, police arrested Bryan Christopher Kohberger at his parents' home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. He had driven cross-country with his father just days earlier, leaving Washington state and returning home for the holidays. When police surrounded the house in the early morning hours, Kohberger came out wearing surgical gloves and was taken into custody without incident. The arrest shocked everyone who knew him. Bryan Kohberger was a PhD student in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington, less than 10 miles from Moscow, Idaho. He was studying the minds of criminals, analyzing their behavior, writing about their motivations. He had completed his undergraduate degree at DeSales University in Pennsylvania, where professors described him as intelligent, quiet, and deeply interested in forensic psychology. But there was a darker side to Bryan Kohberger that few people knew. Former classmates described him as socially awkward, sometimes inappropriate with women, and occasionally aggressive or confrontational. A former friend said Kohberger had been obsessed with true crime since high school, that he would talk endlessly about famous serial killers, about how they were caught, about what mistakes they made. In online forums, Kohberger had posted surveys asking convicted criminals about their crimes, asking questions like, "How did you choose your victim?" and "Did you have any feelings of remorse after committing the crime?" Investigators discovered that Kohberger's white Hyundai Elantra matched the description of the vehicle seen near the crime scene. Cell phone data placed his phone in the area of the King Road house multiple times in the months leading up to the murders, always late at night. On the night of the murders, his phone went dark, turned off or placed in airplane mode, from approximately 2:47 a.m. to 4:48 a.m., the exact window when the killings occurred. And when his phone came back online, cell towers tracked it, leaving the area of Moscow and heading back toward Pullman, Washington. But the most damning evidence came from DNA. When investigators processed the crime scene, they found a leather knife sheath on the bed next to the bodies of Madison Mogen and Kaylee Goncalves. The sheath was for a Ka bar-style knife, consistent with the type of weapon used in the murders. And on the snap button of that sheath, investigators found a single source of male DNA. They ran the DNA through databases but found no match. So they turned to genetic genealogy, the same technique used to catch the Golden State Killer. They uploaded the DNA profile to public genealogy websites and began building a family tree. The genealogy work led them to Bryan Kohberger's family. To confirm, investigators obtained DNA from trash taken from the Kohberger family home in Pennsylvania. The DNA from the trash, belonging to Bryan Kohberger's father, was a match to the DNA on the knife sheath as a paternal relative. Combined with the cell phone data, the vehicle sightings, and Dylan Mortensen's description of the intruder, a man with bushy eyebrows matching Bryan Kohberger's appearance, investigators had enough to make an arrest. Kohberger was extradited back to Idaho in early January 2023. He appeared in court, where he was formally charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. He entered a plea of not guilty. His defense team immediately began challenging the evidence, questioning the DNA collection methods, the cell phone data, and the reliability of the witness description. Acted on those dark impulses? We may never fully understand the why, but the evidence will tell the story of what happened, and a jury will decide whether Bryan Kohberger is guilty of murdering 4 innocent people in their sleep. Before we close, we want to hear from you. Comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Are you in the United States, the UK, or somewhere else in the world? We love knowing that our community spans across continents, united by stories that demand justice. Drop your location in the comments and let's connect. The case of the Idaho student murders is one of the most tragic and terrifying in recent American history. 4 young people, full of life, full of dreams, full of potential, were stolen from this world in the most brutal way imaginable. Kaylee Goncalves, who was about to move to Texas and start a new job. Madison Mogen, who was inseparable from her best friend. Zana Knodel, who fought to the very end to protect herself and Ethan. And Ethan Chapin, who was just spending the night with his girlfriend in the wrong place at the worst possible time. They deserved to graduate, to build careers, to fall in love, to start families, to grow old. They deserved to live. And someone took that from them. In a courtroom in Idaho, justice is waiting. Bryan Kohberger will face a jury. The evidence will be presented. Dylan Mortensen will testify. And the world will watch as the legal system attempts to deliver accountability for 4 lives stolen in the darkness. Scott Peterson thought he was smarter than everyone. He thought he could kill his wife, construct an alibi, and live happily ever after. He was wrong. If Bryan Kohberger is guilty, if he committed these murders, then he too believed he was smarter than everyone else. He studied criminals. He knew how they got caught. He thought he could avoid their mistakes, but he left DNA. He was seen. His phone betrayed him, and now he sits in a jail cell awaiting judgment. This is the story of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Zana Knodel, and Ethan Chapin. 4 lives stolen, 4 families shattered, 4 futures erased, and 1 witness, Dylan Mortensen, who saw evil walk past her in the darkness and survived to tell the truth. This has been the story of the Idaho student murders. Subscribe to The Only Witness for more real crime stories that refuse to fade, stories that remind us that truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way to the surface. Stories that remind us to cherish the people we love, to lock our doors, to trust our instincts, and to never take safety for granted. And stories that remind us that justice, while slow, is still worth fighting for. Acted on those dark impulses? We may never fully understand the why, but the evidence will tell the story of what happened, and a jury will decide whether Bryan Kohberger is guilty of murdering 4 innocent people in their sleep. Before we close, we want to hear from you. Comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Are you in the United States, the UK, or somewhere else in the world? We love knowing that our community spans across continents, united by stories that demand justice. Drop your location in the comments and let's connect. The case of the Idaho student murders is one of the most tragic and terrifying in recent American history. 4 young people, full of life, full of dreams, full of potential, were stolen from this world in the most brutal way imaginable. Kaylee Goncalves, who was about to move to Texas and start a new job. Madison Mogen, who was inseparable from her best friend. Zana Knodel, who fought to the very end to protect herself and Ethan. And Ethan Chapin, who was just spending the night with his girlfriend, in the wrong place at the worst possible time. They deserve to graduate, to build careers, to fall in love, to start families, to grow old. They deserve to live. And someone took that from them. In a courtroom in Idaho, justice is waiting. Bryan Kohberger will face a jury. The evidence will be presented. Dylan Mortensen will testify, and the world will watch as the legal system attempts to deliver accountability for 4 lives stolen in the darkness. Scott Peterson thought he was smarter than everyone. He thought he could kill his wife, construct an alibi, and live happily ever after. He was wrong. If Bryan Kohberger is guilty, if he committed these murders, then he too believed he was smarter than everyone else. He studied criminals. He knew how they got caught. He thought he could avoid their mistakes, but he left DNA. He was seen. His phone betrayed him. And now he sits in a jail cell, awaiting judgment. This is the story of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. 4 lives stolen, 4 families shattered, 4 futures erased, and 1 witness, Dylan Mortensen, who saw evil walk past her in the darkness and survived to tell the truth. This has been the story of the Idaho student murders. Subscribe to The Only Witness for more real crime stories that refuse to fade. Stories that remind us that truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way to the surface. Stories that remind us to cherish the people we love, to lock our doors, to trust our instincts, and to never take safety for granted. And stories that remind us that justice, while slow, is